Sem o público não tem sentido. O público é o complemento de tudo.
Que é muito rico contar uma história para pessoas tão diferentes e que vão receber de forma também muito diferente.
O medo, a emoção, a gargalhada, isso é cinema. Isso é o público quem dá.
Nós, artistas, fazemos tudo com esse intuito, de conseguir com que o público vá além de si mesmo.
Não há nada como vocês.
É para você que as histórias são criadas. É por você que o cinema existe. Nossa homenagem a quem mais inspira o cinema, o público.
Olá.
Hi, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to another BrLab talk, which today we will continue after the second day of activity of REACH to bring some light into several questions that are urgent and necessary in our film and audiovisual industry. It's an event focused on trying to understand fundamental core issues regarding audience, what we can learn to be more connected to the audience to whom we produce. These activities will go on till next week. It's an intense agenda. You can check it on our website. So we will have several talks, such as how movie theaters can coexist with video on demand, film marketing in 2020, how platforms can build niche audiences in the internet. We'll also have a talk with 3 curators of very incredible film festivals to be able to help develop our sector. Our BrLab activities sponsor thanks to Projetos Paradiso, São Paulo City Hall, Programa La Mídia, Global Films, and several other institutions and associations. A very important association has supported us this year. It is an honor to be in partnership with the Department of International Trade of the British government, who we are going to, together with Sarah Moses, present this talk today to talk about distribution impacts and types of distributions for the audience to engage into our work. So that is a very important topic, and to illustrate this with the DIT, and Sarah tomorrow will also promote, will lecture a workshop. And in addition to today, to her talk today, I'd like to call Cristiano Andrade, the leader in Brazil for companies and internationalization. Cristiano, welcome, and it's a joy to have you here with us. Thank you, Rafael. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation. It's always very important to honor and to appreciate events and bring a bit to Brazil, what's going on in the UK, and share it with Brazil. So I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Cristiano Andrade. My work today in Brazil is to help people and companies, especially companies, Brazilian companies that want to become international, go into their international stage, to use the footprint in the UK market. So a company that wants to create conditions to work in the UK market, to have a footprint as a company there, we show how they can do that and what are the procedurals for that, and try to introduce and show the UK to the companies through this type of red carpet. We also help British companies to understand the Brazilian market, whether for seeking partners, investing, get engaged in local productions. Vanessa Babala, which is my co-worker, she stays in Pernambuco, Rio, I stay in São Paulo. They're always talking and trying to look at the creative industry in a more general way, trying to help bridge this connection between Brazil and the UK. So our role is to facilitate, to have Sarah Moses here today, bringing her experience, showing you all what's going on in the UK and making this happen. It's very important. We value this and appreciate this a lot, and vice versa, because of course, taking what we have of Brazil in terms of what is the best and taking it to the UK. So I'm at your disposal to talk, exchange ideas, and whenever you want to, please contact me. Thank you, Rafael.
Rafa, liga seu mic.
There you go. Well, thank you. I was on mute, I'm sorry. I'd like to thank Vanessa Babalao, entire DIT crew, which were very supportive and attentive. Your work is very appreciated. So now I'd like to call Sarah Moses to join us on screen. Sarah, welcome to our screen here. And Sarah is a distributor and also an enthusiast of knowledge, information, which is completely in tune to our space. If you enter the Together Films, there's an insight section where she publishes some articles, some information. She's always thinking and fostering new ideas for our industry. Thank you, Sarah. So now I'm leaving with Cristiano. Sarah will stay here with you talking. We'll moderate the conversations and the question in the chat, and I'll be back at the end to talk a bit. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Apologies, I think I was stuck on mute for a little bit. Can everyone hear me in the studio? Yes, great. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Mosses, and I'm the founder and CEO of Together Films. I am based in London at the moment. I'm stuck in London because of lockdown, so I can't travel at the moment. Usually I would be traveling the world with the work that I do, but it's great to be able to be with you virtually at this point and speaking to you guys over in Brazil. So Together Films, we do a number of different things in our day-to-day work. We're both a distributor, so we sign rights to titles to release in the UK market, but also in the US market and sometimes broader Europe. And we also come on as marketing support to additional projects, whether films or film festivals, to increase the audience reach for those individual films or those film festivals. So I could talk for days about different things to do with audiences and awareness, but today's session, we're going to give you a top line as to what we understand as impact distribution and some of the ways you can think about impact distribution to increase the reach of your projects. I speak very quickly usually, and I know I'm being live translated, so I'm going to try really hard to speak slowly today to make sure the translators can catch up in real time. So let's start with a definition of what impact distribution means to our business and hopefully what it can mean for your business as well as you're operating. So we specialize in impact distribution, and impact distribution for us is working on projects that are both trying to increase the reach and revenue of a title, so making money for that film, but also having a social purpose to the release of that project. So you may be working on a film that specializes in human rights, in environment, in women's rights. It's films that have a deeper sort of social purpose to them. So when you're speaking with audiences, you're not just trying to get them to buy a ticket, buy a DVD, watch the film on television. You're trying to speak to them to encourage them to do a little bit more than just watch your film. And I focus on this kind of work because working in film is really hard and getting an audience is really hard, and it takes so much time and it's lots of money, it's lots of energy. And I quite like putting that energy towards films that are hoping to sort of make a change and do some good in the world. I always say to myself, if someone tried to like headhunt me to sell Star Wars films, I probably couldn't do it because I'm not passionate about those kind of movies. My husband loves them, but I don't. All of these DVDs behind me are my husband's. He watched loads of Marvel movies. I couldn't work on those kind of films. I need to be working on projects that are trying to sort of change the world in some ways. So when we go about looking at a project, also for the studio, I can hear someone else's mic. Apologies in the background. I think someone else is unmuted. Okay, there we go. So when we think about the projects that we're working on, we are looking from an acquisitions point of view for projects that we think are going to start a big social conversation, either in the UK, wider Europe, or the US. But some of our campaigns also go on an international basis. So we do have titles where we've been doing screenings across Australia, across Africa, across different elements of Latin America. So as a business, we are very, very open and welcome to hear from colleagues around the world to see how either we could do screenings with your venues, with your institutions, with your organizations, and also look at content that's coming from other places. So when I'm looking at a film, I'm assessing it both on a performance of, is it a good film? It has to be a really good film to start with. You can make many films that might be trying to change the world, but if they're terrible films, I probably can't do wonders with them. You have a really amazing film and it's trying to change the world and has a really strong narrative sort of hook. We would love to sort of have a look at it and see if we can kind of work on it. So the first thing I always start with, and it's a really important thing to start at the beginning of every session like this, is that for us, we really, really believe that a film does not exist until an audience has seen it. What I mean by this is that producers and production companies spend 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 years making a project. And if you don't consider the audience until the very last day, or you don't think about the audience until you finish the film, you're already a year or 2 years behind where you should be. In the way that the world works now, with the wealth of data that we have online, with the wealth of access to audiences that we've never had before, you should be building up an audience so that your audience is ready and waiting the second your film has finished. So that you have a newsletter that has hundreds of or thousands of people following you, that you have social media campaigns running, that you have a film website ready to go. because the greatest asset you can have as a production company or a producer these days is having an audience ready to go at the point of distribution. Whether you are seeking a third-party distributor and you want to come and work with someone like us and you want to have someone sign your film, or you're trying to release the film directly and do some kind of self-distribution or hybrid distribution model, if you have this inbuilt audience ready to go from your production process, you're going to have a much more successful release kind of on your hands. And the reason, and one of the reasons I love working on this kind of distribution, impact distribution, is it's much more easier to kind of identify who might be a passionate fan of this kind of issue. So let's take a really simple example. There's a great new documentary at the moment about Greta Thunberg. Pretty much every young climate change activist will probably want to watch that film. You can find them by using the Fridays for Future hashtag on Instagram. You can see them on TikTok doing kind of overviews of different climate change issues, kind of what is climate change, how does it function. They are loud, they are vocal, they are passionate, and there's a lot of them kind of online. So when we're looking at a project, we're saying, what is the issue at the heart of this film? What is it really speaking to? Is it just climate change, or is it climate change and maybe also racial justice? Is it climate change and economic justice? Is it climate change specifically in a particular territory? So we start by breaking down the issues in a project to try and ascertain who might be our target audience and how can we identify them. When you're in production on a project, understanding who that target audience is from the beginning is such a helpful tool. And in impact distribution, for me, it is vital. If you've made a film and you're saying, I want to raise awareness of climate change, but you haven't considered what were the previous films that tried to do this? What were the previous audiences that were trying to be contacted by those previous distributors? What was the conversation on this issue 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago? Then you're going to set yourself up for failure. You need to be aware of the other films that come out in the marketplace on a similar theme and what your target audience has been consuming from the media on this particular issue. So if I was looking at climate change today as an example, on Monday, I host a webinar every Monday called Digital Power, which is a series we're doing at the moment, supported by the Perspective Fund, which is an impact funder in the US. Everyone can tune in. It's free to access around the world. And on Monday, I had two incredible young climate influencers, Jack Harries and Alice Eady, and they are doing short form storytelling. We work on features. These guys work on shorts. And they're putting out content every single day on a new Instagram platform called Earthrise, which they've launched. They're also doing collaborations with the Guardian newspaper on short form content. They're going to be launching new stuff on a platform called Waterbear, which is focused on impact films around environmental issues. It's a really great example of two creators, rather than saying, well, we could spend the next 5 years making a big feature on climate change, but is it going to be as important in 5 years as it is now? They're looking at it and saying the impact needs to happen today. So what can we create on a short form basis, on a short content basis, that will inspire action now, rather than having to wait for kind of a long form piece? So the first bit that's been really interesting, and especially the shift we've seen this particular year, it's been a weird year, shall we say, for everyone, is reviewing the kind of content and the kinds of distribution that can work and that can be effective. So as a business at Together Films, we still focus on feature-length content that ideally would be seen in a cinema in real life, also then be seen on television, also be available hopefully on a Netflix or an Amazon platform, and available for download at some point. So our focus is still very much on features. But when I take a step back and look at the wider world of what the possibilities are at the moment, short form content for impact distribution has been incredible this year in terms of the way that people are consuming media and how they can sort of interact with content in different ways this year. So I'm very much tracking in terms of, we probably won't go into funding like short form series, but it's really great to say, okay, well, if I have a feature on this issue, who are those creators who are making short form content on the same theme that maybe we could partner with or supplement sort of audience reach in that direction? So my first point of sort of thinking in today's session of kind of how has impact distribution shifted throughout this particular year would be to be really inspired by the short form creators that are coming up, many of them younger producers, younger directors that are kind of making their mark. But what they've done in an incredible way is they have built audience first, and they're supplementing constant streams of short form content into that audience. So when they then decide at some point, which I'm sure Jack and Alice as 2 examples will do, to create that first feature film or long form series for broadcast, they're going to have this incredible audience ready to go who knows that they create content to inspire people about the climate crisis. So my first point of sort of thinking at the moment, consider the format of the content that you're trying to make. Do you need to hold out for 3 years to make that kind of feature length version of a piece? Or could you start drip feeding short form content to your target audience about the kind of issue you want to make an impact on right now and build up some sort of momentum and then drop a longer form piece later on? Because there is a lot of inspiring things kind of moving forward. And it comes to a point that we always look at, which is what we call impact objectives. So when we think about what is the purpose of this piece of media, if I was just looking at stuff from a distribution only perspective, a distributor's role in the marketplace is to release a film into the market and hopefully make some money. That's what every distributor would want to do. I want to do that. I want to make money for my filmmakers so we can pay them a royalty check, and that can enable them to make their next film. I love making money for filmmakers. It's great. It's a great feeling to pay someone that check. But it's not the only thing that drives my work. The other thing I want to make sure is happening is that there is impact being created. So how is that revenue being generated? Are we doing screenings in cinemas? Is there screenings with corporations, screenings with grassroots organizations? Who is seeing the film, how they're seeing the film is as important to me as someone just wanting to pay a check to kind of watch the film. So when we start working on an impact distribution campaign, we're starting off with a different set of objectives. It's not just what will be the highest license figure for this title, who will give me the biggest check for this film, how many people can I get to buy the film on iTunes in the first week. Yes, it is that, but it is not just that. And I think what 2020 has done really well for many of us is get us to really reflect on what do we want to be doing as humans? What do we want to be as humans? Like, do we want to be running around the world? I used to get a flight every 2 weeks. I work in climate change films. That's totally like wrong compared to what I do with my day. Now I can speak to you in Brazil from my lounge, as I'm doing every day with different labs and conferences and forums that I'm in. Maybe I don't need to fly every day now. Maybe that's like not necessary at that point. And when I look at just colleagues and the kinds of films they're putting out, there are a wealth of sort of new distributors and new partners who are releasing these kind of impact films. And I feel like that's increased. I haven't got like statistics to share today kind of on proving that for the moment, but just from looking at the marketplace, a number of distributors have been coming in with much more sort of impact focused work this year than ever before kind of previously. And when we think about the election cycle in the US, that will have had a massive impact in terms of curational decision-making kind of over this year. So I feel like 2020 has given us all a moment to sort of consider, rethink sort of what it is that we want to be working on, what the kinds of projects we want to be working on, because we can't just hop on a flight at any moment and go and do what we want to do because of lockdown reasons and the world just being in a crazy place this year. And that slowing down, I think, has given us all a moment to really consider the kinds of films we want to kind of work on. So let's consider the US election, because this was a massive point of conversation in this year's impact distribution landscape. So we all knew the election was coming. We've known it for 4 years because they happen every 4 years. You would think those who wanted to release a film to rally people around before the election would have planned that in an early way. Because one of the biggest aspects of an impact distribution campaign is the timeline. When is it most strategic to release this film on this particular issue to have the impact that you want to make? So a great example of this, over the summer, we were really proud to work in a very, very small way on the release of the John Lewis documentary, the Good Trouble documentary that Participant were releasing in the US. We had a very, very minor role. We were helping with some virtual events they were doing online. They knew that that film was going to be a really great driver for election sort of registration, motivation for people going out to the election. So it was very poignant that they timed the release of that film early on in 2020, because many states in the US, you have to register to vote early on. So they needed to make sure the film was out kind of earlier in the year. So the film had a theatrical release supported by Magnolia in the US, obviously limited theatrical because of COVID and being in lockdown. And they pivoted to doing a lot of virtual online screening events. This is where we kind of helped in different ways. And this has been my life for the last 8 months. I've pretty much hosted a Q&A event or a live panel event every other night, every 3 days for the last 8 months. Whereas before, when you're planning a distribution campaign for a film, you might agree with the team, we're going to have a big red carpet event to open our theatrical release. We're going to have a handful of different Q&A events to take place to kind of begin the launch. When there was no limitation of having to be in a physical space, you could basically do a Q&A whenever you wanted to. So as part of the John Lewis rollout, there was a screening booked with a group of people in America, and I was responsible for running the sort of Q&A in the back end. And so over the last 8 months, I've tried every single possible version of Zoom, YouTube, Crowdcast, StreamYard, every possible configuration of an online screening platform you could think of. And every different campaign had different versions of kind of doing this. And one of these screenings for John Lewis, leader Stacey Abrams popped in, she was going to be on the Q&A. And many of you, if you didn't know Stacey Abrams before, will probably have heard her quite a lot the last few weeks because she was instrumental, one of many organisers in Georgia who got 800,000 people out to vote, new voters in Georgia as part of this election. And that helped get the decision that's happened in the US. I won't assume anybody's political leanings, but let's just say I had a great weekend last weekend when the results came in for Biden at that time. So a leader like that, you might not be able to get to an in-person screening every single day. One of the best things about impact distribution is the conversation you can have with an audience after a screening. And so this rise, this massive, massive rise in virtual screening kind of participation also meant you had access to these incredibly high value speakers that you maybe wouldn't have got before. So when I was helping out in that participant release over the summer, these incredible kind of racial justice activists who've been fighting these fights for 50 years would pop up in Zoom. We put them all together in a conversation. They'd be speaking with the audience members. And it gave this sort of like excitement back into the film sector, whereas the rest of our colleagues were still trying to cling to, well, if it's not in a cinema, then it's not real distribution. And what are we doing here? And it's all there. The people who fully embraced the sort of virtual screening environment, which was driven a lot by impact distribution releases, they're the ones who've seen really incredible success. A project who we started a webinar at the beginning of the year to advise people how to use these online platforms. So if any of you are sitting there right now being like, I have no idea what you're talking about. What is an online platform? How would I do screenings online? How would I get a politician to kind of zoom in? Definitely encourage you to go and watch back some of the episodes from our Digital Perspectives webinar series, where we break down in quite a lot of detail all the different technology platforms that we used over the last year to give you some ideas of kind of what to kind of play around with. But it's become this element that for impact distribution campaigns, we couldn't wait for a film to come out later if it was trying to push awareness to the election. So many of you probably heard that the James Bond film was pushed back till later. Many other like big studio releases went, we can't do this, we're going to come out in 2021. There was a whole wave of films that were coming out in the US market to raise awareness of election rights before the election. Those films could not wait until theatres were open again. So there were countless documentaries that were doing virtual screening initiatives. We took on a couple of projects in August to frantically get some screenings to take place before the election. And we're changing our decision-making because of the impact focus on those films. So I'm a huge advocate for never giving a film away for free. I actually put out a whole thread on Twitter today about this because I was really angry because someone had tried to give away a film for free again. Never give your films away for free if you can help it. You should always be getting value for your projects. But in the run-up to the election, when we're desperately trying to get audiences to watch a film to inspire them to go and vote, we were making different decisions because we knew the purpose behind those releases. So some of the films we were advising on over the summer, we were saying actually, okay, we would have charged $500 for a screening in this organization's kind of office before. We're happy to do it for $100 if you promise that you raise awareness of voting rights in your organization. And this is the constant battle between impact, distribution. Impact distribution is distributing a film because you want to make impact. The distribution part of that is so crucial. You are still entering into rights kind of relationships. You are still trying to get audiences excited. You want audiences to pay for the film. But you can make different decisions when the purpose in this critical moment is to get people to vote in an election, as an example, to say, actually, I don't want to push for a higher screening fee here. I'm going to let them have it for a cheaper rate. I'm going to let them go for it there and then. Because we wanted as many audience members as physically possible to see these films in the run-up to the election. My biggest note was some films came to us, no joke, 2 weeks before the election saying, it'd be really great if we could release our film. It's all about election rights. We should make sure everybody's seeing this. Can you make sure this film's out everywhere? I was like, guys, I'm good at my job, but I am not a miracle worker. I can't build an audience in 2 weeks before an election, especially during an election. It's like you have to have that time. So the biggest note, and you could really see this in clear detail this year because of the election in the US, if your film has been created to raise awareness of something during a particular moment in time, please make sure you plan that timeline nice and early. So anyone who had a film that they wanted to kind of put out before the election this year, they should have been starting their audience engagement work in January. They should have had a 10-month, 11-month run of building up audience interest in advance of that election cycle. So when you're considering now kind of post-electionness in America and what you're looking at for 2021, I want you to sit down now with your team this week and plot out for your projects when is the most important moment for us to bring this film out into the marketplace. Don't say to yourself, well, I want it to be at Sundance. I want it to be at Tribeca. I really want to get into South by Southwest. I want to play at the Rio Film Festival. Okay, fine. Yes, you want to do that. That's great. But think about the purpose of your release. Do you have local elections that you're trying to fight? Is there an International Women's Day celebration? Your film's about violence against women. You want to kind of hook it around there. Think about the strategic moments in your timeline that would make sense to drive mass audiences towards your project. And one of the most frequent websites our team internally looks at is the UN website of official UN days. So there's the Earth Day, there's Water Rights Day, there's Human Rights Day, there's International Women's Day. There are many days in the calendar. And the UN particularly celebrates all these different days around the world. What it basically means is that you have millions of humans, millions of audience members, all excited about that moment in time. So we're working on a project at the moment called The Eighth, which is a film about the change in law in Ireland where abortion became legal again 2 years ago. So many people from outside of Europe might not have realised that the UK, we've had legal abortion for many years, but in Ireland, it's been illegal for the last 30 plus years, to have an abortion. So people would travel from Ireland to the UK to have an abortion and then go home again. And The Eighth is a film that looks at the amendment to the eighth clause of the Constitution in Ireland, where they managed to repeal that law and now abortion is legal again. So we're looking at when makes sense in the timeline for that film to come out. We were initially thinking, oh, maybe an autumn release would be nice. It'd be good to have it out this side of Christmas, bring it out in the UK and Ireland kind of during this window. But then all of the cinemas locked down again. There's literally nowhere we can screen it physically. And this film in particular, again, is really meant for a conversation. The vote was won to repeal the Eighth and make abortion illegal again in Ireland, but there were still many people who wanted it to be illegal. And there is a very close correlation in Ireland between religion and state sort of policy. So a correlation between people who were more maybe religious in their beliefs and their commitment to wanting to keep abortion illegal. So we were looking at, okay, if we can't do it this autumn, too many cinemas are closed and we don't want to rush it out, let's maybe hook it around International Women's Day next year. So our plans now have shifted by 6 months to push it to that moment, but make sure there is still that focus so that many women around the world who use International Women's Day as a moment to fight for reproductive justice could use the film during that window. So what's really fascinating about speaking to Brazil at this point Oh, there we go. I'm back. Apologies. So apologies for that break. The joys of a live. So one of the things interesting about speaking to you guys in Brazil at the moment is part of our strategy for the 8th is that we're now doing a scoping across the entire world. And we're trying to identify what other countries are there on the planet right now where abortion is still illegal. Because what we want to do with this film is screen the film in those countries as a conversation starter to think about the reproductive rights for women in those areas. And if you're sitting in Brazil at the moment, you'll probably know that there are a number of countries across Latin America where abortion is currently still illegal. And there is a huge pressure on sort of women's rights and women's reproductive rights in the region. So one of my team members, she's part Colombian, she is doing active research right now, looking at all the different laws across Latin America. Which countries is it legal? Which countries isn't it legal? Is there a parliamentary debate coming up? Is there a kind of a highlight event coming up in the region? Where can we bring the film into that conversation in a respectful way, in an engaging way, to use the film as a conversation starter kind of in that territory? You may have seen in the news, if you're kind of tracking kind of what's going on in that section, that in Poland over the last few weeks, there's been massive street protests because they tried to outlaw abortion in Poland over the last few weeks. And so many people came out saying, no, we're not going to have that. We want to keep our rights, that the government has to change their minds again. So whereas with another kind of film, you might just say, it would be really nice if we released a film in Poland, maybe at one point, or it would be great if we had a release in Latin America. What fun that would be. That would be really great to go there. We look at distribution from a completely other side of the scale. We're saying, where in the world do we literally need to change a law? Like, what are those countries? And then backtrack to say, okay, well, who would be a distribution partner in that territory? Who might be a screening partner? Who might be a festival partner? Is there an incredible organization who could host a panel event with us? Do we need to do it in person? Could we do it online? If we did it online, what kind of support mechanisms would we need? A really fascinating thing that's come up in our line of work, we've done a number of different films that focus on women's rights. And depending on the subject that we're looking at, we've had a few different films that look at sexual assault and violence against women. And these are two extremely delicate kind of issues to cover when you're working on a film. And so sometimes what we'll have is we'll need to engage therapists or counsellors to be in cinemas in case the films are too triggering for the audience member. And this happens kind of far more frequently than I think people really understand. Having that counselling support there can be so important to some kind of people watching a film if they're going to be triggered by what they're seeing. So if someone's gone through an act of sexual assault and they're watching a film about that, they may need some kind of support. And we've had some incredible examples where people have used Zoom rooms as an example to host an online screening of a film about sexual assault, sexual violence, and really, really kind of very, very fragile kind of issues. Have a Q&A session in a Zoom room afterwards, and have a breakout room in that Zoom room with a therapist there just in case you want to go into that breakout room and get some support. Now, you couldn't do that if we were sat in a cinema. Like, you just physically couldn't do it. So we would have a big screen, there might be 300 people, everyone's sat in listening to Q&A. There may be an audience member sat there who's being extremely triggered by what they're hearing, but they can't do anything. They're sat in the middle of a room, it'd be really rude to leave the room, they might be too kind of upset to do anything. But having that kind of virtual therapist support there is a sort of incredible thing that you can offer your audience members now, because there's no embarrassment. It's not about being embarrassed, but there's no embarrassment to be like, I just want to pop into this room. You can facilitate it really well. So there's these amazing opportunities in this new virtual environment to have an even deeper connection with an audience member, because you can put them in a one-on-one conversation with someone who needs support kind of on that side. So let's take it back to some more of the tangible elements of what I wanted to cover today to start with were just some of these different shifts of what we're seeing in the marketplace, because I don't think the film distribution marketplace will be the same ever again. The idea before where you had to be in cinemas only for 3 months, nothing else could happen because of the holdback provisions, I don't think we're ever going to have that. It's like, I don't think any theatre or distributor anymore can say, well, no, you have to be in cinema for 3 months before you can go on TV, or you can't sell DVDs before here, or no, you can't be on iTunes until that's happened. This idea of windowing that we clung to for like 75 years, I don't think will ever return to kind of that mandate. So when we look forward to 2021, we're looking into this incredible moment for experimentation, for trialing innovative different ways of distribution. And the key one for me is bringing the film to where the audience is, rather than trying to drag the audience into a venue they don't want to go into. So with our virtual screening initiatives over the summer, we've done hundreds of screenings in countries all around the world. Just last night, we did a premiere event for a film called Coded Bias, which has just launched in the US. We had a premiere panel, sort of like an opening night kind of Q&A panel. If that was in a cinema, maybe like 100 people would be able to be in that room. We had over 1,000 people tune in live. Nearly 500 people have watched it on replay already within 12 hours. And the film is about racial bias in technology. So from an impact objective point of view, I want as many tech companies as physically possible to watch this film, to change their practices internally to reduce bias in technology. The leading researcher, who's the star of the film, Joy, she realized that facial recognition technology most often doesn't recognize Black faces, and particularly doesn't recognize Black female faces. Because so much of the technology was created by white men, they modeled so much of technology on themselves, it didn't work if you weren't a white guy. And this kind of notion of bias in technology throughout the film is then explored in multiple different angles. So then it looks at sort of misuse of data, errors in databases, all the different ways that technology is being affected by bias. So from this amazing event last night where 1,000 people tuned in to hear this panel live, we've already had something like 25 different screening requests coming in. We've got screenings in the works now with Amazon, with Facebook, with Google, with lots of other companies around the world who want to engage their global employee base, audience base around the world to talk about this film and hear this film. And if we just had a regular old panel in a fancy cinema in New York with 100 people, I don't think we would have had the same response. I don't think we would have made such quick impact of having those people get in touch. I don't think we would have made as much money, figuratively, when all those people paid for screening licenses as we would make kind of from this moment. So for me, when I look at like 2021, I'm super excited about all the things that we could be doing that before people would say, well, we can never do that. We can never make that happen. So my sort of top tips of what I want people to think about over the kind of next year. Don't worry about sticking to the old rules of distribution. If you want to do a screening online with an incredibly passionate group of campaigners who are based across Brazil and Spain and France and the UK, do it. Have that screening. Don't wait for someone to tell you, oh, I haven't got distribution in France yet. I shouldn't do an event with like 50 really passionate individuals that want to see my film. Do that screening. Do it online. Do it in a safe and secure way. If you need tips on platforms that will keep your film safe online, do check out episode 1 of our Digital Perspectives webinar. There are a number of different platforms you can use. And the key thing you're always looking out for is a platform that has DRM security. So it's kind of digital rights management security. So it basically means that it makes it harder for someone to pirate a film on an online platform. So I'm not saying like put the film out available for free all around the world. But if you want to start building up audience, and especially multiple country audiences, start doing that as soon as possible to build up this kind of grassroots support for your project. It's been amazing to be in online panels and Q&A forums with individuals from South Africa and Venezuela and France and the UK, all coming to the same kind of, it's a really sort of fascinating dialogue that you can have. So firstly, like, don't wait to engage your audience, engage them as soon as possible. The distinction between cinema events, theatrical events, and what we would call non-theatrical events. This might be screenings at schools, universities, in kind of businesses. The line between those two things is very blurry at the moment because so many of them are going online. Whereas before, you could only screen in the cinema for 3 months. And then after those 3 months, then maybe you could screen in a college or somewhere else after that. When it's online, those things can happen really easily side by side with each other. And this is something I've been fighting for years. I'd be like, why would we stop a school screening a film 20 miles down the road from a cinema? I'm not going to get those 25 school kids into my cinema. Why not let them both happen at the same time? And what I'm loving about this year is it's really opened up that distinction was not really helping anyone. So when you're considering the rollout, and if you're a distributor listening in, I definitely encourage you to think about this a lot. If you're a filmmaker listening in, try and encourage your distributors to think about this. Let the theatrical and non-theatrical screenings happen at the same time, because we are basically saying, I want to be open to my audience. Wherever you are, we will bring the film to you, which is really key. The next thing to think about then is the ways in which you can identify audience in such an easy way at the moment. So what became really apparent this year was the lack of understanding of data in our sector of the industry. So I take a lot of my planning for impact distribution campaigns, and when I think about the purpose of what we're doing, I read a lot of like business books, like business planning books, project management books. And one of the biggest things everyone talks about is target audience and what's called route to market. So how do I get my film to a particular audience? And in today's world, with essentially social media, Google, and some simple advertising, you could not be easier to identify your audience and talk to them. Before, we would rely on like print advertising. You'd have stuff in magazines, in newspapers. You'd have no idea who was really watching stuff, reading stuff you couldn't get through. So a priority for every single person launching an impact distribution campaign is you need somebody on your team, or you need to hire someone that will support you on your social and digital activation. This is no longer it would be nice to have someone. And it is also not the job of an intern or an unpaid assistant. If you think just hiring your friend's daughter to come in, just poke around on Facebook in the morning, no, this is a proper job. It is as important as hiring your line manager, hiring your camera person, hiring your sound person. You need someone on your team today that understands how social media and digital adaptation works. Because if you don't, your film will do worse than your friend's film. There are so many things that you can do for free at the start of a film's life to build your audience up at the start. So have a presence on every social platform that you are able to kind of keep up with. If you don't like Instagram, you're never on Instagram, you don't think you've got enough photos to go on Instagram, maybe don't have an Instagram page. But if you have beautiful photography, if your film is a stunning film, if it looks really amazing, have that page up and make sure you're working it in real time. Make use of the hashtags for your issue. So if you're working on climate change, you should be tagging everything with Fridays for Future, climate change, climate crisis. Use the hashtags that are available online to identify those audiences. Make sure you're personalizing your content to that platform. It is terrible form these days to post something on Instagram and automatically post it onto Twitter straight away, because the tagging references are normally different, the hashtags might be different, and the picture doesn't appear. So you should be posting content to entice your audience directly onto each of those platforms to speak to them directly. You should be posting frequently. Frequent posting for your campaign. There is a big difference between running an impact distribution campaign where you want to be in the conversation every single minute of every single day and just posting a link that says, we're at the festival tomorrow, please buy a ticket. That's it. You're not conversing with anyone. You're not in a conversation with anyone. You're not changing anything if all you're posting is just like, buy a ticket, I'm here. So a thing that we talk about a lot in our office is what we call topical content. So I'm releasing a film on climate change. I want to be looking every day, what's being written about in the New York Times, in the Guardian, in Cosmopolitan, in any publication about climate change that I think might engage my audiences. And you want to have this balance between a third of what we call point of sale, POS. So point of sale post is literally we are in a festival tomorrow. The ticket is €10. Buy it here. It's a point of sale post. The only reason you're putting that out is you want someone to buy, you want conversion. Think about yourself. If you were following a page and they only ever said buy, you'd be like, well, this is really boring because I don't want to buy a ticket and I'm not in that city, so no. You're going to lose your audience immediately. You have to balance it with topical content that keeps them in a conversation. So have a list of go-to news sources to find information about the issue that your film speaks to. If you are running a comprehensive impact distribution campaign, you should become a source of truth, a source of knowledge and insight on that issue. I released a film many years ago now, 8 years ago, about ping pong, about table tennis. For 1 year, I pretty much played table tennis every single day. It was a film about old people playing table tennis. So everyone in the film was over the age of 80 years old. And it showed how playing table tennis was really good for your health, really good for your brain, real positive. I literally knew everything there was to know about table tennis for that year. I don't remember any of it now. It was 8 years ago. But for that 1 year, I was an expert in how to play table tennis, what to talk about, how old people functioned around it. We screened the film in over 2,500 old people's homes. I probably couldn't run that kind of campaign anymore, especially during lockdown where I can't physically travel to those venues. But rather than trying to force 65,000 old people into a cinema, I took the film to the care homes where they lived and got them to engage in the film in that manner. In a digital life, you can take the film now to any digital space where your audience is. So if your audiences are on Reddit, I don't know how popular Reddit is in Brazil, but in the US, it's massive for like some of the films we work on. Is your audience in LinkedIn? Is your film about sort of corporate abuse programs? Is it around corporate change programs? Is LinkedIn a really good forum to kind of find your audiences? Are you in a Facebook group kind of audience? There are so many like mothers groups on Facebook. If you have a film that deals with family issues, children's issues, go into every single one of those Facebook groups and every day join the conversation. The most crucial aspect of digital marketing, digital awareness, digital understanding is joining a conversation with your audience, not just broadcasting to them. A tool that we use, it's quite an expensive tool, so you probably want to find a variation on it kind of that's better in the Latin American market, but we use a tool called Sprout Social, S-P-R-O-U-T, Sprout Social. And we can plug in all of our issue words. So let's take coded bias as an example. I can put into the system technology, bias, racial injustice, elections, so to do with that. And it will scour all of social media and it will say, okay, here's a Twitter profile that mentions the word technology. Here's a post on Instagram today that mentions racial bias. Here's a profile that's talking about technology in the elections. And the system, it's called social analytics and social listening. It will listen to the whole of kind of social media in real time and throw up audience members for you. So when I first started doing this work 10 years ago, I would spend hours like on phone calls, searching through Google, trying to find audience groups that would make sense to my film. Now you can use tools online that every day will say, here's 100 new audience members for your film. Or we've got a screening in Sao Paulo. Okay, only listen, rather than the whole of Brazil, just listen to Sao Paulo. Oh, here's another 100 people in Sao Paulo who are talking about the issues in your film. And then you're going through to them, sending them a direct message, liking what they're saying, commenting on their posts. That sounds so fascinating. Love to hear your opinion. Have you seen our trailer? Have a look at this here. So when we think about like the vital skills to make a successful impact distribution campaign in the market right now, you need someone on your team who is your digital expert, is your social media expert. It cannot be an intern. It cannot be an unpaid assistant. It cannot be just like a junior. I mean, they could be a junior person. They could be young, but it's a vital part of your team because audience engagement in 2020 now revolves on digital skills building. Before, I would always say it was kind of time on the phone. But we will now have partners. We send them one kind of direct message on Twitter. We send them a trailer. We get them a screener. We go back and forth a few times. And we have like this really amazing little partnership with this organization that we've never met. We've never spoken to in person. We've never met in person. But they want to help the film because we're going to kind of showcase their work that they're working on as well. So the key thing of saying during the conversation, the difference in impact distribution is that you want to actively hear from your audience members. So if your audience grouping has a new sort of article about the issue in your film, you should be sharing that on your channels. You should be showing love to your audience in the same way you want your audience to show love for your film, because that will keep your audience growing and growing and growing. A film that we're releasing at the moment called 2040 looks at what will the world look like in the year 2040 if we use all of the climate solutions that we already have in existence. And the film, led by the producers in Australia, did a really sensible thing. They have a Facebook page to talk about the issues in their film. And they also have a Facebook group where audience members who've seen the film can go into this group and talk about climate solutions. The group, because I get the notifications on my phone every day, have thousands of comments every single day. Well, I just put solar energy on the top of my roof. My school has a recycling plant. It's all the solutions that they're seeing kind of in the world around them. And every time someone posts something, that means that that film is coming back into someone's feed on Facebook and someone else might buy a copy of the film. So the audience becomes your marketing engine because they are talking about the issues constantly in the framing of your film and how it's operating. So we were doing at the moment, we're reviewing all of our strategy documents Together Films. So we've had a kind of a process over the last maybe like 4 or 5 years that we apply to each one of our projects, and we'll run through and say, okay, what's the issue context for this film? What is it really about? What are the objectives that we're working to? Is it about reducing bias in technology? Is it raising money for refugee rights? What's the objective? We're always looking at our target audience. Who's our target audience? We're looking at our partnerships we could be working with. We're looking at our timeline. So all the things I've kind of said in summary today. And what we've realized in 2020, and we're looking at all of our documentation, is we internally now need to flip all of that thinking and start from the basis of how are we building our digital footprint of this asset of a film online in the 21st century. Because we have to start thinking about things from a digital first perspective. Whereas before, it would be like, oh, at some point we'll launch a kind of Facebook page. Now we have to say, kind of, that needs to be launched well in advance of our release. It has to be live, it has to be active, it has to be speaking. So the second the film comes out, there is already an audience there. And you have to think of, I now think of all of our impact campaigns as mini businesses in a way. With a film release and a traditional distributor, you can sort of use this notion of we have a slate of films and once every month we release one new film. There's a highlight moment when it comes out in cinemas, then it drops down, the next film comes up the next month. If you are running a really good impact distribution campaign, you've basically gone out into the world and said, here's a really horrible thing that we need to fix. Let's take 2040. We need to fix the climate crisis. It's not working. We need to fix it. And the film is also about fixing the climate crisis by the year 2040. And this incredible, massive humans of our audience have come together to watch this film and embrace the film. We can't just have a high point of theatrical and then drop that audience to the ground. And our next film might be about refugee rights. Now, yes, there might be a sort of a mix of people who are passionate about the environment and also passionate about refugee rights, but also they could be very different ones. So we're having to keep a conversation, a digital footprint with those climate activists, and then at the same time launch another campaign where we're trying to build alliances with refugee organizations on the other side. And you can't let this audience then drop into nothingness. So realigning the sort of resources in an organization, whether you're the filmmaker, whether you're a distributor or a sales agent, and saying, what is my long-term goal for this audience? I might not have another climate film for 3 years, but I want to keep this audience active. The best way to make that happen is to make the audiences themselves become the engine of that campaign. So the 2040 Facebook group, Anna, who moderates that group in Australia, she hardly ever has to go into that group anymore. It is a self-moderating community of audience members who are passionate about it. And that, I'd say, is when you know that you've got a successful campaign, is that your audience is super serving you without you then having to kind of tease it anymore. And that takes a lot of time as it goes through. So planning from a digital first perspective, having someone on your team who is looking at it from a digital first perspective, who's an expert on all different social media platforms, an expert in website construction, website analytics, making sure that there is someone who understands the data to make your job easier. So it's easier to find the audience members because they're just coming up into your analytics directly. And it's easier to keep the relationship with them. Because impact campaigns are hard work. Like, it is difficult to change a law. It is difficult to change the perception of human rights abuse. Just this week, we got the news that a film we worked on 3 years ago, and I'll finish with this sort of little story of hope. We worked on a film 3 years ago called Unrest that was about chronic fatigue syndrome. And we screened it in Parliament pretty much 3 years ago to the day that Parliament announced a change in their regulations in the way that they treat that disease in the UK. And campaigns that had been fighting for this change for nearly 20 years. So it's not just because we released a film, it's because of many more bits of work in the background. But we know that when we screened the film in Parliament and 50 members of Parliament came to that screening and said, we had no idea what this was about, we'd never heard of this thing before, we didn't know how important this was. We knew the film changed their mindset, changed their thinking. And then it took 3 more years to change that guideline. We now know that's going to be helping thousands of people in the UK who are fighting for that cause. So if you want to come into our world of impact with distribution, we welcome you, but also be in for a long road of lots to do. But we are very hopeful that in this year, with the expanse of virtual screenings, the expanse of being able to find your audience, there's a lot of opportunity to make a change. So I'll pause there because I think we have some questions coming in from the audience. Oh.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Hello. Hi. So, thank you so much. What a masterclass. What an interesting and amazing job, and very difficult as well. Very hard. It's amazing. I have some questions here. Let me start. I have some questions as well, but we should start with the audience participation. Let's see. Gustavo Maximiliano asks, what are the parameters you consider to access the results of an impacted distribution? Could you tell us about any specific movie that you consider a successful case?
Yeah.
And I would say, for example, like for Zama, it's an amazing also case that you have. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So, I really like you asked that question. Was it Maximiliano you said to answer? So,
yes, Max.
Yeah, so great question. So showing kind of how you like prove impact is such a hard concept because it's really hard sometimes to like understand. You can say like, oh, we earned this much money in the cinema. That's a really clear number. It's really kind of specific. It's really hard sometimes to know how we made impact in other ways. So the first part of the answer to that question is define some rules at the beginning for yourself, like what would mean impact for you, for your particular film. So screening in Parliament, that is an impact in itself, getting that screening to happen. But actually then getting the law changed, it was 3 years later, that's like a longer term kind of goal there. So if we said change the law as our impact goal, we'd be really sad because you didn't do that in the first 6 months, but getting the first step of going into Parliament, that's a really good one. So recent examples of films that we think have done really well. For Summer, I'll just mention as one of the ones we worked on recently. For Summer was a film about the Syrian refugee crisis by an incredible filmmaker called Wad Al-Kateb. And it follows 5 years of her life living in Aleppo, living under the siege of Russian and Syrian forces. And it ended up being Oscar nominated last season. And that's all amazing. But the more important bit is the work that the film's been doing to build empathy towards refugee rights, raise significant funding for Syrian organisations on the ground. So to date, I think it's now over £75,000 has been raised from public audience donations towards Syrian refugees on the ground. If you haven't seen the film, it's a very emotional watch. Like I would very much encourage you to watch it. I'm not sure where in Brazil it's available, but I can triple check and let you know. It's a very, very moving watch. And so many audience members always say like, how can I help? And a donation platform was set up so they could donate money, which was really good. But it's also been screened with UN officials. There is a motion moving through in Congress around different issues around Syrian refugee rights at the moment. So in addition to saying, yes, Oscar nominated, that's a win, it's actually the work around that has been kind of most impactful and a real moment of pride for the filmmaking team. And that campaign was completely born out of Wad's reason for making the film. So for Sam is a really good example. 2040, not just because we worked on it, but the impact of what they did in the Australian campaign even more so was phenomenal in terms of changing climate change for good kind of on the ground. I'd say actually the John Lewis doc in America, in terms of the number of votes they were bringing out, Amazon had a film about Stacey Abrams this year on voter rights that was very, very popular in America. And I think, I don't know the numbers of it, but it probably contributed to the mass turnout in certain states across the US, which is really powerful. A good resource for having a look at films that have made impact. I used to work for Doc Society, which is a fund in the UK that funds documentaries. And we had an impact award where filmmakers could submit their evidence of impact and there would be case studies written up. So if you haven't looked at that, I definitely encourage you to look at the Impact Award run by Doc Society for some good case studies. Oh, Rafi, I think you're on mute. Joys of online. There's always a mute button.
Okay. Yes, I think the host muted me and then I cannot do it myself. No, Andre made a question which somehow you already answered, but I think it's interesting to recap, which would be like, what would be the difference between regular distribution and impact distribution? Both require an extreme careful target audience analysis, right?
Yeah, so much of the work is identical. You've got to have a target audience, you have to have a marketing plan, you have to have a distribution plan. So a lot of the work is very similar. I'd say it's the strategic thinking of the things that are not driven for profit purposes. So as an example, getting a screening in Parliament, whether it's European Parliament, UK Parliament, Congress in America, that's like 3 months of planning time, minimum, maybe 6 months. That is creating a guest list of the kind of 300 MPs you want in the room. That is hounding their assistants to get them there. That is preparing briefings when they're in the room. So that one screening of like 2 hours of your life might be 4 months of work. And there is no guarantee that they're going to do the thing that you want them to do when they've seen the film. So for me, the balance of kind of the impact and distribution and kind of regular releasing is a lot of the work is very similar in terms of making sure the film is available. You have to have a good poster, you need a trailer, you need your social media plans. It's the above and the extra steps you have to go to. And the consideration in some moments, you may have to balance that purpose and profit kind of line. So I know some distributors that we've worked with in the past, they'll say, well, unless that organization is willing to pay $500, they can't have a screening. And I'm there going, well, they've offered $400. That's still money. Like I still take the 400. They're like, no, unless they have these rules. They're like, no, our rule is $500. And I'm sitting there going, but this is a passionate audience. They want to screen your film. They want to talk about it. They want to kind of like raise awareness in this particular region. They also want to pay you $400, but for some reason your rate card internally said no. I have a lot of those conversations where I'm trying to balance this, what I would call like the more old school distributors with new thinking, because for me, they want to pay $400, let them do it, like just let them do it. So you're constantly balancing sort of profit and purpose, I say. But ultimately, you still want to make a profit. That's the real difference in terms of how we approach it anyway, is that we still want to pay our filmmakers royalties. We're not giving away free everywhere. Okay.
And another question from Max, which connects with this idea, and I think it's quite interesting. Like he asks, as a distributor, what do you expect from the films that are presented for your consideration in terms of the previous work of building its audience?
Mm-hmm. So when we're reviewing a title, the first thing we're looking at, like, do we love the film? So we're definitely starting with like artistic merit, like, do we love the film? That's like our first thing. Then when we look at like what you have prepared, The first point is the kind of film. So if you have a film that has like investigative journalism, maybe it's about something that is like a live human rights case, you might not have been able to do any proactive marketing previously because it might have harmed your filming process. So we're very aware that some people can't do early engagement. But some really small tricks that I would definitely encourage. Have a website. Even if the website is like one picture or like the trailer, like have something live and make sure that your Google Analytics is switched on. So you're maybe only getting, 200 visitors a month, 300 next month. But if you can see that chart is going in that direction rather than that direction, even if it's small, that is showing that you're growing an audience. So have a website, switch on Google Analytics immediately. If you can, switch on those social media profiles nice and early. And even if it's like one post on Facebook a week, that's 5 minutes of your life. Draft a little thing, put it out, put something on to again show that kind of increase. So we're not looking for millions of followers when you come to us. We're looking at, have you set up most of the time the base level and you can show that things are kind of moving in a direction. And as soon as possible, and this is the thing that everyone forgets, that please do, have a screening request form on your website. So what most people will do is they'll just have an email address like hello@filmname.com. And someone will email and be like, I'd love to screen this in Sao Paulo. I'd love to screen this in Paris. I'd love to screen this in London. And then you just lose those emails. You just totally forget to read them. You reply, it was 2 years ago. You forgot to go back to them. Have a form that says, okay, what is your name? What city are you based in? How many screenings would you like to do? How many people do you think would be at the screening? Who's the screening for? Is it for school kids? Is it for corporations? Have that list. Because then, even from production basis, like you're midway through your production cycle, you can be collecting screening requests through that form. And when you wrap, you're like, amazing, we've got like 100 people around the world that already want to screen this film. Mm-hmm. That's a really good indication to us as distributors that people want to support your film in big ways.
Nice tip. Joanna Ning, it's a director, producer. She has actually one project in the workshop with you tomorrow. She's asking how the impact campaign frequently includes free sessions for specific audiences with Q&A. Do you think this is bad? And she also asks, like, she would like for you to comment a little bit more on the online charged and free exhibitions.
So say the first part of the question again about the Q&As, something about Q&As.
The an impact campaign frequently include free screenings for specific audiences with Q&A. Do you think this is bad?
Okay, so we break down our screenings into when we're prepping a release, and like think of it like pre-production. So like we have with a film, in your pre-production moment, you're doing research, you're kind of analyzing what you're gonna make. We will have a pre-production phase of our impact campaign. And usually for us is about 2 months long. And during that time, we will be researching organizations, speaking with different kind of audience groups, following the different hashtags kind of online. And we might do what we're calling like stakeholder screenings. So pre-screenings before we release the film to get sort of ambassadors to embrace the film. So whether that's with climate activists, different organizations around. And we'll curate those screenings in a really deep way. So we might invite just 100 people. When they were physical, we would do them in real screenings. Now we'll do them kind of online. But we would always do usually like a few screenings in advance in the same way that you would do like press screenings. So if you want the New York Times to watch your film, you are putting on a screening so the New York Times can watch your film. You're not telling the New York Times to buy a ticket in that way. So we would normally be invited like the head of communications from Greenpeace or the head of communications from Amnesty International. We're not inviting the whole of Greenpeace. We're inviting someone from their team that we think will become an ambassador. So in the pre-production phase of our campaign, about 2 month window, traditionally we might do like 5 or 10 of those screenings to build up an ambassadorship of individuals who will be passionate about the film. Once the campaign is then live, we are always trying to secure a fee for those screening events to generate the purpose and the profit. We want the film to always be seen as valuable. And we'll go to some kind of campaigns where we might drop the price to like $30 for a screening, which is way below what we would normally do, to enforce the point to that group that there is a value in you doing this screening that is valuable to the filmmaker's work. So we would always come do that way. We then have done, depending on projects, mass free screening events, depending on the timeline of what makes sense. So as an example, we had a film, The Ground Between Us, that wanted to come out before the election. We were doing lots of different screenings kind of across the country. And then we said, right, let's just do like a mass free screening on a particular day and try and get everybody to watch it before the election. So we were paying digital ad spend to drive traffic towards a free screening to make sure that people were watching it in that moment. And then the week after the election, go back to paid screenings again. So I'm not against free, but I don't want to default to free. And it also depends, and it's very much linked to the way your film's been financed. So making sure you're discussing with your financiers, like if you've managed to raise all the money from like Kickstarter and a grant, like go you, that's amazing. But if you've got financiers in the film, if you just suddenly start giving away for free everywhere, they're going to start asking questions. So most of the projects that we're working on, the big features, feature documentaries, they've got equity investors that need paying back. So we have to be very conscious of what can we earn them back. So my number one thing is like, don't just default to free, but you can use free in very strategic ways. And the final little anecdote I'll say with that, I worked on a film about gang violence about 7 years ago, and the film was rated too old. We wanted kids to watch it to stop them joining gangs, but it was rated too old, so they wouldn't be allowed to go and watch it in a cinema because they were too young. And that was mental, because we were like, but they've seen the violence, they've seen they hear the swear words, like that this is their life. But our board of classification gave it a 2H rating. So I self-pirated that film. I put it on BitTorrent. I put it on Pirate Bay because I wanted the kids to watch it, because it was important for them to see it before they join these gangs. No one knew that we did that. Like the film was still in cinemas, the film was still on Channel 4, the film was doing all these lovely things. But in the background, I was self-pirating a film because my target audience would not be allowed in the cinema and I needed them to see the film. And because of that strategy, the guys in the film who were gang members in the region or exiting gang members who were leaving the gangs, they became really famous with all the kids of that age in the inner city areas because they could see it on a pirate basis. So I've never pirated my own film since that day, but for that film with that audience, there was literally no other way of ensuring they would see the film. And so we even gave out, like we made like shit looking DVDs and like gave them to a load of kids in a city and said, go copy it, like give it out. And the key thing was that we weren't losing money on that because the kids would never, they weren't allowed to buy a ticket in cinema. It was too old for them. And we also knew they didn't spend money on cinema because the average person goes to cinema twice a year. We as filmmakers go many times. The average human goes twice a year, and they were not going to pay for this film. And also there was no clause in the Channel 4 contract, so Channel 4 broadcast the film. There was no clause that you couldn't pirate your own film. So it also wasn't against contract. There is now a clause that says you can't pirate your own film, but then there wasn't a clause, so no one thought that you'd do it. So yeah, I don't mind free, but you've got to be strategic with free, not just give away.
Amazing. It's an amazing case, actually.
On you.
Yeah. So Maria Josefina, who is in the Industry Academy, I think she asks, how many months it takes for you to make an impact distribution campaign since you buy the film?
Mm-hmm. So I'll give you my ideal timeline, and then I'll give you my reality of what normally happens. So ideally, we would love to know about a film that we're working on it 6 to 9 months before the film comes out. So if we take the classic case of a Sundance title, we're really lucky that we've worked on numerous films that have premiered at Sundance. We would love to know in like March or April that we're going to work on that film that's aiming for Sundance in the January next year. Because that gives 6 to 9 months to design that website, switch that website on, get those social media campaigns going, build up some partnerships. Crucially, potentially, write some funding applications to also provide more budget towards the release. So an amazing thing about impact distribution compared to other forms of distribution is there's quite a lot of funding. I mean, there's not loads of funding, but there are funders in the world who see a value in film being used to make change. So organizations like the Ford Foundation, the Open Society Foundation, they can support some of the costs of releasing a film for impactful purposes. My screen is frozen. I'm hoping you can still hear me. Maybe you can't, but I'll keep talking in case you can still hear me. So they are open. You can hear me? Okay, great. So,
yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I think it frozen on my side. So they are sometimes open to funding campaigns. And it doesn't have to be those, they're like massive funders. It could be a tiny fund just based in Rio who maybe gives you like $500. So it's not about the size of the fund. It's just like there are people who might say, we'd love to help with this campaign. And it's the people who might give money towards Amnesty or Greenpeace to do their work. You're coming in and saying, but my film can do that same thing. A lot of those funders have deadlines 3 to 6 months before you can get the money. So the reason we like to come in so early is because hopefully we can put some funding applications in really far in advance before the film comes out and then roll it out. And then post-release, a traditional film release from the moment that it comes out, like on the first day of cinema, you might have sort of 3 months of focus of activity, and then it dies off a little bit because your next film then comes out. We're usually on a film for like 12 to 18 months because it normally just keeps growing in the interest. And we're doing so many of these screenings around the world, it will just keep growing and growing and growing. So when you break it down, it's like 6 to 9 months in prep and then 12 to 18 months of like proper activity on that title. That's nearly 2 to 3 years of your life in one film. What happens a lot of the time is we get a call 2 weeks before Sundance. Oh my God, we got in. We need to have a campaign. Please can you help? And we're like, okay, fine. So we're like making a website in a day. We're switching on social media. Like we have to be quite reactive to what's happening. And the other reason we have to be reactive is if things change in the world. So a film we might start working on because suddenly a law's changed or suddenly an election's coming up that wasn't expected or something like that. And suddenly a film, so I have a very squeaky door in my house, suddenly a film might become really important. And so we have to jump in and help at that time. So I'd say our average stuff we're working on is like 6 to 9 months on average. No.
Amazing. We are reaching the end of our talk, but there are 2 questions here that they connect a lot. Camila Wilches asks how to manage return in profit expectations on impact distribution campaign. More or less you said, but I think this is something that people is asking. And then Marina Tarawai, also who's also in the workshop that you are going to meet tomorrow. She asks why it's common that the financing return and the impacts and the social impact usually stays in different sides from the balance.
Say that second one again. So why the impact and profit?
Why the social impact and the profit and the financial return are in different sides of this equation of this weight of this balance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we try and look at them as the same thing. So I'd say like in the world, there's 2 different ways people do impact. This is actually, I had a Twitter rant today. So anybody who follows me on Twitter, you'll see I was like ranting about this today because we see impact distribution as the same thing as opposed to impact distribution. So if I need to screen the film in Parliament, if I need to screen the film with an organization, I'm still screening the film. That is still a negotiation of a right to license. That is still an approval of saying, you can screen the film in this setting. Are you charging tickets? Are you not charging tickets? What's the revenue base? Like for me, that's still a license. That's still an approval that needs to go through. So we try not to distance impact and distribution in it. It's just the inherent purpose of the distribution campaign is looking in an extra capacity for the delivery of an impact, which is not just box office or not just iTunes sales. So the format of distribution, the focus of distribution is the same in terms of the mechanics of it and the legalities of it. But at the end, we want to make sure that it's not just saying you earned this much money in box office. it's also saying you inspired this many people to donate towards a campaign, or this many people to sign a petition. So we try and keep that as much as most close together. The other side of that point, though, comes back again to the financing of your film. So if you have financed your entire film through grants, you've got no equity investors whatsoever, you might not have to pay back any of your revenue and profit from distribution to a third party. You might just be able to keep it as a production company. Yay for you. That's really good that you've done that. You might want to say, I want to recycle that profit so that every time we earn $100, we're going to keep $10 to pay for the campaign keeping going. So we might put that $10 towards advertising or towards a social media manager, towards whatever. So you might say that the profit I'm making, I want to recycle back into keeping a campaign going long term, rather than just taking a payday today and saying, great, I made $10,000 today, and kind of leave it there. And we see that in impact distribution campaigns, where you might have, easy maths, $100 license fee, and it might say $50 is going to go towards our investors in our film, and $50 is going to be retained by the campaign, because we know the campaign is generating more screenings. So if we give all the money to investors, then we run out of cash in a month. Who's going to do what? So there are loads of different examples, and there's different variations of this model across the sector, where you pre-agree with your investors. This is a really important point. You have agreement with the investors that you take a part of the profit to them, and a part of the profit can go on spending on costs to keep a campaign alive. And most of the time, in old times, this would be like pay for travel. So like the director needs to go to another Q&A, that's another train, it's another hotel, like who's paying for that? That would then be able to pay for those costs to like keep it going. So yeah, the finances, I can give you like, and maybe in the workshop, for those who are in the workshop tomorrow, we can get a little bit more detail here, but there's a number of different variations of it. The most important thing though is make sure you discuss with your financiers first what you're hoping to do, to make sure everyone's in agreement before you decide anything of those kind of areas. So.
Okay, nice note, very interesting, equation. We are almost bursting the time, but I think we still have time for one more question. I think I really don't understand very much. What is this? Actually, I do understand. Which is, I think it's related on how the industry is changing on 2020 and in the late years and everything. But Denise Haddad asks, what do you think about the following configuration, which is the sales agent, distributor, producer, and content creator? Do you think it is still valid and functional for impact distribution?
Great question.
Yeah.
So sometimes yes, sometimes no. And if I think back to when I said before around like, I looked at business planning and business like theory quite a lot. Imagine it like the entrepreneur versus an old school business. So if you are entrepreneurial and you are excited by the idea of being more involved and running more of the items of a distribution release, because of what's happened in 2020, there is less of a barrier between you and your audience than there was before. So before, you had to go to the sales agent, they would go to the distributor would go to the broadcaster, go to everyone else. Like you couldn't get to that audience. You had to go through all these different kind of levels. Now you could, in theory, like I can email someone sitting in Venezuela and say, hey, this is an amazing film. I think you're really gonna love it. It's all about Venezuelan rights. Do you want to do a screening of this in your local cinema in 2 weeks' time? Like, to do that. And like, I could just email that person. There's nothing to stop me doing that these days. So it's more just on like, how much effort do I want to do to try and make that happen? Because there's no barrier to access. Whereas before, I wouldn't be able to contact that person. I wouldn't be able to know who they are or find them. So if you yourself are quite entrepreneurial, and to be fair, many producers are, because you've made a film, like you're pretty entrepreneurial anyway, you may be able to be more involved in some of these areas. And the sweet spot and where we see sort of the best configuration is where you do have So let's say, for example, we're working at the moment alongside Roco Films, which are an incredible sales agency out on the West Coast of America. So they are doing the kind of traditional broadcast sales around the world, while we're focusing on theatrical and sort of impact screenings across Europe for a title. So the best configuration, and then the filmmakers are super active. So they're like, here's an amazing idea, and here's a partner, and have you heard about this person? We should do a Q&A. So the best one for me is where you have like some of your traditional partners, you get the right ones, with a company like ours, which is like very focused on impact distribution, and then a filmmaker who feels like they're allowed to be in that conversation and be a part of it, not just be like, here's my film, I'm going to walk away. Because that's what used to happen in the traditional mode. Like, you had no approvals, the film would come out, you wouldn't even know it's come out in the world, like there'd be no connection with you to that title anymore. So if you feel like you want to be more involved, either you can do a lot of it yourselves these days. You can set up your own iTunes style platform on your website in a day. Like, it is not hard anymore. You can switch on a system and it can work. And you can do virtual events now. There's not even the restriction of like, oh, the cinema's too full, we've got too many films out. Doesn't matter. Just build an online version of it. So there's much more for you to be able to manage yourself, which is exciting. And the final point on that is that you also get a closer relationship to the data. So when you have to go through a sales agent, a distributor, into a cinema and down, you literally had no idea who was in that cinema, ever. You did not know who they were. Now, if you're doing it online, I know every single human in that online, and I can email them, and I can send them a survey, and I can ask them questions. So you get a much closer relationship to data, and that from a career perspective can be really helpful, because you might have that audience relationship then for a very long time, which can be good. So that is a positive that way.
Nice, thank you. There's no, actually there are some questions, but we don't have more time. Iago Artur says something that I really would like to share, also as mine. He says that it's an excellent session, amazing session, really good, and a lot of knowledge and information shared. This is not a question, but an invitation to Sarah to visit us in Brazil as soon as the pandemic is over.
It's so welcome to Brazil. Yeah. For anyone who didn't know as well, I was supposed to be in Sao Paulo in April. I'm a mentor for Campus Latino, which is a Latin American development lab for documentary. And I was so excited to come to Brazil for the first time. I've never been before, and I really wanted to come. And it was the first of my international trips that was cancelled because of COVID. And I cried. I actually cried. I was there. I wanted to come to Brazil for like 10 years. So yes, as soon as I am allowed to legally travel again, I would be delighted to come over to Brazil and be there in person. So yeah,
yes,
it would be
definitely, and we will celebrate and you definitely come.
Yeah, that would be great. It'd be very fun. And thank you for your kind words. I'm glad it was insightful for you as well.
Thank you. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Carol, our amazing translator. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, our audience. Thank you, our staff. And see you tomorrow, Sarah, in the workshop. E continuamos com a nossa programação até o dia 27. Não deixem de acessar o nosso site e se inscrever nas próximas mesas.
Continue with our schedule until the 27th. Continue accessing our website. Bye bye.
Obrigado. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.